Good morning, dear students. Today, the topic which we have selected is contradicting the prevailing conditions in Kolhapur and Mumbai. I'm talking about the weather conditions. For a couple of days, there was a heavy downpour of water in Kolhapur. But today, we are seeing a patient who comes to you who hasn't passed a drop of urine for, say, 12 hours or very scanty urine for 24 hours. So the topic is anuria. Anuria we can define as no urine, not even a drop of urine for 12 hours or 24 hours, or very scanty urine, that is 100 ml or less in 24 hours. And when we see for the bladder is empty. Now, there are two different conditions in which the patient can come to you with a complaint that he hasn't passed the urine. One is anuria, that means no urine is produced and no urine has come into the pelvic ileal system or into the bladder. Or there is another condition where the urine is produced which has come into the urinary bladder, but patient is unable to pass it. So one condition we will be calling it as anuria, while the other condition is called as retention of urine. So what is the first and foremost thing you have to see or check when the patient comes with complaint that he hasn't passed the urine is in which condition he is in, whether it is anuria or retention. So the diagnosis will be very simple. Just if the patient is lean, thin, you can just palpate the hypogastric area where you can palpate the distended bladder that confirms that it is retention and not the anuria. Or if the ultrasound facility is available, if the patient is stocky, chubby, where palpation is not possible, you can do the ultrasound. And ultrasound will show you whether there is urine in the bladder, whether the bladder is distended or not. If the ultrasound shows urine in the bladder, it is a retention. And if the bladder is empty, it will be anuria. Now, you don't have a facility of ultrasonography. If you are working in a periphery, what you can do, you can put a simple catheter into the bladder under all of the septic precautions, obviously. And if you see there is no urine into the urinary bladder, you can label the patient as having anuria. Or if there is a urine, you will see that a good amount of urine is drained out. And in children, sometimes we can do suprapubic puncture just to see whether the bladder has urine or not. So, in other words, if a patient comes with no urine, confirm that it is anuria and not the retention. What are the causes where no urine is produced for 24 hours or in a day? There is one thing common as far as etiology or etiopathogenesis is concerned in two different diseases. One is anuria, and the second, which is irrelevant for today's topic, that is jaundice. How do we classify jaundice or anuria? Jaundice is related with liver, anuria is related with kidney. For jaundice, the causes we divide into pre-hepatic causes, intrahepatic causes, and post-hepatic causes. So likewise, for anuria, we divide the causes in pre-renal causes, intrarenal causes, and post-renal causes. So out of these, the pre-hepatic and hepatic are usually medical conditions. Likewise, pre-renal and renal are usually medical conditions of anuria, while post-hepatic jaundice, also called as obstructive jaundice. So similarly, post-renal anuria is also called as obstructive anuria, which is necessarily a surgical condition. So we as a surgeon are more concerned with post-renal, that is obstructive type of anuria. So if we see here, the pre-renal causes are before the kidney, the renal causes are inside the kidney substance, or the post-renal causes related to this area. So what are the pre-renal causes? Anything which results into reduction, significant, sudden, acute reduction in blood flow, either the quantity or the pressure, that will result into renal ischemia or renal hypoperfusion. The conditions, common conditions will be hypovolemia. Now there are two hypovolemic shocks here we are concerned. One where there is a fluid loss or there is a loss of blood. When the active blood is lost in an injury, we call it as hemorrhagic shock. That is also a type of hypovolemic shock. Or where the fluids are lost, the common conditions are if there is a severe vomiting, severe GI upset resulting into diarrhea, so there is a GI fluid losses, or there is a severe burns, there will be loss of fluid. So all these conditions which can lead to hypovolemic shock. And if the hypovolemic shock is not corrected in time, that may result into renal failure and anemia. If we remember, almost all the shocks like hemorrhagic shock first we have mentioned, or hypovolemic shock, or septic shock, or cardiogenic shock, all these shocks, all these failures can lead to renal failure and can cause anemia. So these are some of the causes. Apart from that, if there is a failure of three vital organs, namely, if there is a cardiac failure, the blood perfusion will be reduced, or if there is advanced liver failure or liver disease, it will result into renal failure, or if there is severe injury to the blood flow, that will cause kidney hypoperfusion. So all these will result into renal failure, and this will in turn cause anuria. How does it matter? Anything which results into decrease in the circulatory volume, ultimately that causes stimulation of baroreceptors or osmoreceptors, with an end result that the glomerular filtration rate is drastically dropped and the urine output is significantly reduced. So whenever there is a hypovolemia, there is a vasoconstriction because of renin-angiotensin mechanism is set in, that results into constriction of the vein and arteries. And this vasoconstriction, if it remains for longer time, it will result into medullary hypoxia and ultimately medullary ischemia that will cause tubular injury. And this tubular injury may cause, because of added inflammation, may result into acute tubular necrosis. The short form is ATN. So all these, they will ultimately cause reduction into the glomerular filtration and the patient will land in anemia. Right, these were the causes before the kidney. Now, what are the causes inside the kidney? Now we know there are 3 or 4 elements in the kidney. There are glomeruli, there is the interstitial tissue, there are tubules which collect or secrete or absorb the metabolites, and there is a channel inside the kidney. If any one of them has a severe damage, that can result into renal failure. So if the patient has acute glomerulonephritis, likewise if there is an interstitial nephritis, or if there is an infection of the kidney directly or as part of systemic infection, and this is the important, many drugs and many metabolites can cause damage to the kidney. These are called as nephrotoxic drugs. Now, which drugs are nephrotoxic? The drugs can cause damage to the tubules, or they can cause damage to the interstitial tissue of the kidney. So the drugs which can damage to the tubules are, most important of them is contrast agents, which are used for intravenous urography or contrast enhanced CT scans. So these are contrast agents. Aminoglycosides is the major group which is proved to be nephrotoxic. like gentamicin, like amikacin. These are the antibiotics, aminoglycoside group. They can cause toxicity. And anti-malignancy drugs like 6-platinum and methotrexate. They can cause damage to the tubules and in turn can cause severe renal damage resulting in anemia. Another group of drugs which causes damage to the interstitial tissues. So this group includes sulfonamides, all non-steroid anti-inflammatory drugs, the rifampicin, the cephalosporins, and ciprofloxacin. So here, why we have to remember all these things is whenever we are using any of the drug here, we have to keep in our mind, or it has to be at least to the back of our mind, that these drugs are potential nephrotoxic. That is why whenever you are using these drugs, the patient's hydration status should be good. So if you are using even paracetamol or brufen, please see to it that you are adequately hydrated or the patient is adequately hydrated when he is consuming these drugs. Or aminoglycosides, if you want to put a patient on aminoglycoside, before starting it, see that his renal parameters are normal and he doesn't harbor any subclinical renal disease. Otherwise, it can further cause the damage and the patient can have severe renal nephritis. Now, apart from these drugs, these are the 4 different entities which can block and clog the tubules, and that's why they can cause tubular necrosis and the patient can go in renal failure. First is hemolysis. Commonest example of hemolysis will be mismatched blood transfusion. If there is a mismatched blood transfusion, there will be hemolysis, and this hemolysis results into clogging in the renal parenchymal tubules, and that can cause failure. Similarly, in rhabdomyolysis, the myoglobins which are released. What is rhabdomyolysis? It is a severe crushing of the muscles. In severe trauma, severe crush injury, when the muscles are crushed, the myoglobin, they are released into the circulation in large amount, and these can block the kidney and can cause renal damage and renal failure. Or if the patient is on chemotherapy, chemotherapeutic agents, which result into severe tumor cell lysis, again can cause, or myeloma. So in these 4 conditions, we have to remember. So any patient who is undergoing blood transfusion, you have to take all the possible precautions to avoid mismatched transfusion. Any patient who has a crush injury, we have to suspect that he may likely get into renal damage. So to prevent that, adequately hydrate the patient. So this is the importance of knowing the renal causes. So what we remember here, if we want to safeguard the kidney, these certain drugs, they should be used with precaution. And these certain conditions, they have to be dealt with anticipatory problem. So that is importance of knowing the renal causes. There are certain infections which are common into the kidney that can cause renal failure. The infection could be directly affecting to the kidney, or it could be a part of systemic infection which has traveled into the kidney and caused damage. The viruses, all the 3, Epstein-Barr, cytomegalo, and the HIV virus, all of them, they can cause renal failure. The streptococcal infections are very notorious and known to cause the renal damage, and the candidiasis. So all these infections, they can lead to damage to the kidney, and there will be failure. Now we have seen the pre-renal causes, we have seen the renal causes. Now we'll see the post-renal causes. This is our area of domain today. The topic of our lecture is the post-renal causes. The causes outside the kidney. So what is happening here is the circulation, the pressure, the filtration, the quantity, everything is normal. The kidneys are ordinarily filtering the urine. So the urine is produced, but whatever urine is produced does not reach to the bladder because of there is some blockage. So there is some obstruction. That's why this is called as obstructive anuria. So what are the causes of the obstruction? Now, pelvis and ureter. Both are hollow structures. Last time only we have seen that whenever we are dealing with hollow structures, we classify the pathologies of any hollow structure are causes outside the lumen, causes in the wall, and causes inside the lumen. So likewise, here the causes outside the lumen means outside the ureter or outside the pelvis. What are the causes? So commonest is prostatic hypertrophy. If there is a prostatic hypertrophy, if there is a severe gross prostatic enlargement, it will block the bladder outlet. At the same time, it will block the ureteric orifices. Or if there is a malignancy arising from the cervix of the uterus or from the urinary bladder or from the prostate, they will infiltrate the ureteric orifices and block them. So these are the causes outside. What is the commonest cause of intraluminal causes? Cause inside. Well, urinary stone is the most common cause of causing obstruction that will lead to anuria. Now, can there be a urinary stone on one side and there will be anuria? Usually it should not. Because if there is a block on one side, the other kidney is functioning and the urine will be produced and patient will be comfortable otherwise, urine-wise. So if there are obstruction on both sides, maybe at various levels, means there is an obstruction at the pelvis on right side and obstruction to the ureter, lower ureter on left side. So both obstructions will lead to anuria. So if there is bilateral simultaneous obstruction, or if in some unfortunate patients, if there is only one kidney present, now only one stone, because the other kidney is either absent or removed. In those situations, the patient, even with one-sided obstruction to the functioning kidney, there will be anuria. So patients with solitary kidney or patients with bilateral obstruction will get anuria. So like stones, many times if there is a severe infection into the kidneys, both the kidneys, there are debris. So the debris, they will clog. Like the stone blocks, the debris, they will come and clog and block the orifices, the ureter or the peliureteric junction. Or multiple crystals, they are formed if the patient is on these drugs, like acyclovir or indinavir. So these are immunity resistant drugs. They can cause formation of crystals, and the crystals, they will come aggregate together and block the pelvis. Or if there is a bleeding, the clots can block. So these are the causes, but the most commonest cause is stones which can block. So if there is a bilateral block, and then another group is called as iatrogenic. Iatrogenic means while doing surgery, some surgery in the pelvis, inadvertently, unknowingly, if the ureters, they are ligated, they are crushed, or they are damaged. Now, easily we can imagine which are the probable surgeries where the ureters are likely to get ligated or damaged. The most common will be hysterectomy. When we are removing the uterus, while doing the hysterectomy, when we are ligating the uterines on either side, along with the uterines, the ureters may get ligated. So on both sides, if one side gets ligated, maybe patient will not go in anuria because other ureter will keep on pouring. But if both the ureters are ligated, or unfortunately the patient has only one kidney, in those situations, the patient will have anuria. So this is the iatrogenic cause. How the patient will manifest, how the patient will present. In most of the situations, there are no symptoms at all if we pick up the patient in first 24 hours only. Means patient has come only with a complaint that he has not passed urine for 12, 18 or 24 hours. So there may not be any complaint apart from that. Otherwise, the patient may remain asymptomatic. And when you do the investigation, then you come to know that this patient has obstruction somewhere. You do ultrasonography or you do serum creatinine, and you find out that the patient is in renal failure and there is a cross hydronephrosis with a block. and the cause of the block is probably the stone. So that study tells you that the patient is in anuria, and you diagnose it like this. Other presentation will be if the same patient comes to you after 36, 48, 72 hours, third or fourth day, then he may be symptomatic. He will give complaints of fullness or feeling of pain or dragging pain in both renal angles because of sudden severe stretching of both the kidneys. And along with that, the patient can have listlessness, or he may be having confusion or fatigue, anorexia. He can have nausea, vomiting because of raised creatinine, indicating renal failure, and weight gain and edema because of retention of fluid. And the patient input is there, but he is not producing any urine, so the fluid will be retained in, and it will be in the form of edema. And if you take the history along with this, the patient will say that he hasn't passed, he is passing very scanty urine, or he hasn't passed urine. So the complaints may be mild or they may be severe. Very rarely, very unfortunate patients, if they come late, they come with uremic encephalopathy or uremic bleedings or severe anemia. So this is the commonest presentation of post-obstructive anuria. Now, when the patient comes, you have taken the history, you have seen that the patient has not passed the urine for 24, 48, whatever it is, but at least for 24 hours, there is no urine production. So what is the first thing we have to do is send all these investigations, like complete blood count, CBC, then serum creatinine and blood urea, along with that serum electrolyte, the sodium, potassium, and blood gas analysis if the facility is available. Usually, we write urine analysis immediately after complete blood count, right? In all other diseases, it is a part that CBC and urine, these are the first two investigations. But here, I have written it fifth because in most of the situations, the patient is not passing any amount of urine. So there is no question of analyzing the urine. But if the patient is passing scanty urine, say 10, 20 ml, then that urine, or you catheterize the patient to see, to check whether he is passing. So whatever 10 ml you collect from the bladder, that can be sent for urinalysis. And another very important investigation you have to do is electrocardiogram. So these are the important investigations done with imaging studies. So send the blood sample to the laboratory and do the imaging study. Now, what will happen to the serum creatinine level? The normal serum creatinine level is 1.4 milligram percent or less than that. If the serum creatinine is more than 1.5, remember there is something wrong with the kidney function. And in our very first lecture only, we have seen that there are two kidneys. So there is a 200% function, 100% from one kidney, 100 from the other. So if there is 200% function, if 100% is lost, even then nothing will happen. Means one kidney is not there, nothing will happen. But if 30% out of 200 remains, and if it is less than 30%, then the creatinine will start increasing. What does that suggest? Even a smaller increase into the creatinine level suggests that both the kidneys are in danger. Means out of 200, less than 30% function is going on, right? So this should give you the alarm. So creatinine level, any level beyond more than 1.6, usually more than 2, should alarm you that there is something wrong which is going with the kidneys. So that is about creatinine. The complete blood count, why do we do? Because most of the time these patients will have anemia. So hemoglobin estimation is very important for us. If it is severe anemia, we'll have to correct that before any surgical procedure is to be done. Or we also to see the total blood count also, because that will suggest us urinary tract infections or infections of the kidneys. So likewise, complete blood count is very important. Why we want to do serum electrolytes? Because there is likely renal failure. So which is the most important electrolyte here, which we have to remember if we are posting the patient for surgery? It is the serum potassium. Because if there is an increase in the potassium beyond certain level, it can cause problem to the heart. It can cause, we know there is a possibility of cardiac failure if the serum electrolytes are, especially the potassium is grossly deranged in the form of hyperkalemia. So for this, all these investigations are very important. Then we see the imaging studies. What are the imaging studies? The first and foremost we have to do is the stethoscope used by the urologist, that is ultrasonography probe. So do a ultrasonography, and ultrasonography will give you 2 or 3 things related to the anuria straight away. One, it will show that the bladder is empty. Two, it will give you the cause and level of the blocks on both sides. And three, it will give you the hydronephrosis or the dilatation of the pelvic LHL systems above the level of that obstruction. So all the features of etiology, they will be delineated on ultrasonography. Along with that, you can do a X-ray KUV. X-ray KUV, we can pick up the stones, level of the stones and size of the stones. But KUV will not show you the structural abnormalities in the kidney, which ultrasound will give. Next very important investigation, if the facility is available, we have to subject the patient for plain CT scan. Now, specifically, we have written here plain CT scan. What is the other type of CT scan we do? Is contrast enhanced CT scan, that is called as CECT. But here, can we use contrast? Usually not. If the patient's creatinine is more than 2 or 2.5, contrast should not be injected because the kidneys will not pick up it and will not get any information. On the other side, the kidneys which are likely getting damaged, they will further get damaged because of the injected contrast. So all these patients where we are suspecting anuria because of whatever etiology, don't do contrast enhanced. It is a plain CT. Now, plain CT will give all the details what we have seen on KUV or UAC, but with more precision. Means where are the stones? How much is the dilatation above the stone? How much is the renal damage because of the obstruction? All those features they will be seen. And in certain situations, MRI has to be done, not as a routine, but in certain conditions. So these are the important investigations. So the most important investigations radiology wise are sonography and either X-ray KUV or CT. Now this is the example of ultrasonography. If you do ultrasonography, first thing when we put your probe on the kidney, what we will see? This is a gross hydronephrotic kidney. There is a pelvic LHL system, this black shadow. These are pelvic LHL system which is grossly dilated, and the cortex is very thinned out. We can see the kidney outline and the hydronephrosis. So this is one side, this is other side. So bilateral, there is block somewhere below. Here it is bilateral upper ureteric stones. Along with that, if we see here, the same probe, if it is put on the bladder, it shows a bladder calculus, which is blocking the bladder outlet. So this patient had a neurogenic bladder. Because of the neurogenic bladder, the ureters were blocked. So because of the ureters were blocked, the patient had uremia. So this is what ultrasound can do. If we do X-ray KUV of this patient, what can we see? Now here, if we see carefully, there is a right pelviureteric junction stone. So there is a stone in the right pelvis. So the right kidney is blocked. There are 2 stones in left pelviureteric junction. So left kidney is also blocked. So the urine just cannot go to the ureter and cannot reach the bladder. So there will be cross hydronephrosis on either side. Right? So this is a case of bilateral pelviureteric junction stones. Here, if we see there is a stone at the pelvic junction, another case, with dilatation and obstruction on right side, while on the left side there are multiple stones in the pelvic ileal system. Along with that, one stone at the pelvic junction, and there are stones in the upper ureter as well. So there are multiple stones on left side with blockage, while right side there is one stone blocking the kidney. And this is the third example of getting the X-ray KUB. Now here, if we see, there is a stone on right side in the lower ureter on right side, while on left side also there is a stone. So this is a case of bilateral lower ureteric stones. So ultrasound, it will show you here, if you do ultrasound, the stones will be picked up on ultrasound. Along with that, the ureter and the kidney, they will be dilated above the stone, right? So the urine is produced, but the urine just cannot reach into the bladder, and the kidneys are under pressure because of the stone. These are impacted stones. So the stones could be at various levels. On one side, it could be in kidney, the other side, it could be in the ureter, likewise, right? So all these things, they could be picked up on ultrasound, or they are picked up on X-rays or CT scan. Once the patient has come to you with no urine, you have taken the history, you have done the investigations, and you conclude that the patient is in anuria because of obstructions by some reason. Now, the patient must be hospitalized. So every patient must get treatment as an indoor patient. If required, he may be admitted into the critical care or intensive care unit. And more than one medical person needs the attention, mainly the nephrologist, the intensivist, and neurosurgeon. So they have to work collectively on the patient, and the treatment plan has to be decided. So it is the intensivist and nephrologist. Initially, they look for the clinical assessment of intravascular volume, and we have to avoid any fluid overload, because what is happening here, kidneys are otherwise normal, and there is good amount of fluid already inside, and the fluid or the urine is not getting produced. So there is a chance of fluid overload. So we have to take care of that. We have to start supportive treatment for the patient. Many of these patients, because of the obstruction, there will be urinary tract infection. So antibiotic has to be started. One very important consideration here is which antibiotic we will start. Now, this is very important, because in our first few slides, we have seen that many antibiotics are nephrotoxic. They themselves also will add to the what is called as insult to the injury. So we should not do that. So the antibiotics, judiciously, they should be used, which are not nephrotoxic. We have to maintain adequate nutrition. If required, the patient has to be kept on ventilator by the intensivist. And if the patient is diabetic, we have to take control of that. And if there is anemia, we have to correct it as early as possible. So correction of anemia, correction of diabetes, and correction of urinary tract infection with correction of fluid and electrolyte balance is the first line management. Now, many of the times when we are giving all these treatment, still the patient doesn't respond effectively, and his serum creatinine levels keep on rising, or there are certain parameters which are not coming under control, then that is the indication of what is called as renal replacement therapy or hemodialysis. These patients, they will require hemodialysis as the first line treatment. So which are the patients, even in post-obstructive anuria, which are the patients who require hemodialysis? If the serum creatinine level is more than 5 or 6 mg/cent. These are the patients who require 1 or 2 cycles of dialysis, hemodialysis. Once the creatinine comes around 3, then those patients, they can be subjected for any surgery for removal of the obstruction. Or if the patient has a severe refractory hyperkalemia, serum potassium remains persistently high. Now, if there is a high potassium and if you subject the patient for surgery, what is the possibility? Now, during anesthesia or during surgery, the potassium may rise further and then that can cause cardiac arrest. So to prevent that, the serum potassium should not be more than 5. So that's why if there is a severe hyperkalemia, it should be brought down by doing hemodialysis 1 or 2 cycles and then subject the patient for other surgeries. Then volume overload, if there is severe gross edema or there are signs of cerebral edema or there is a possibility of pulmonary edema because of the fluid overload, then this fluid, at least initially, that should be taken care of by doing 1 or 2 cycles of hemodialysis. Or if there is a pericarditis. So all these are the indications of putting the patient to dialysis first. Do the dialysis, get these parameters to near normal, if not normal, maybe little on higher side. And once they are under control, then we go for the further treatment. Now, the further treatment is usually removal of the obstruction. But whenever we are treating a post-renal anuria, these are the 5 goals which are there in our mind. What is the first goal? It is the patient. So patient's safety is paramount. After patient, it is the kidney safety. We want to safeguard the kidneys. And once we have seen that, once we have taken care of the patient by doing the management which I have already discussed, and now once we know the kidneys are also safe now, then we have to relieve the obstruction. Now this obstruction release can be done in 1 or 2 stages, and then if you are not able to tackle the cause of obstruction in first stage, then subsequently once the patient's condition improves, we can go back and do the definitive treatment. We'll see it afterwards. And once you have cleared the patient of the obstruction, once his renal parameters they come to normal, his life is safeguarded, then we have to discuss about the prevention of further occurrence of similar episode. Right. Now these are the 3 possibilities we are seeing here. Bilateral pelviureteric junction stone. So no urine will come into the ureter, no bladder, so it will be anuria. Or there is a possibility of stone at the pelviureteric junction on one side, upper ureter on other side, or there is a possibility of stones in lower ureters on both sides. So in either situation, the patient will have anuria. So all these patients, depending upon the situation, will require treatment. What we have decided, first give the general treatment, then see that the parameters are near normal. Now the patient can be subjected for the removal of the obstructions. So what are the things to be done in surgical wards? We catheterize the patient just to check whether he is passing urine or no. If there is no urine, then we will have to do a combination of procedures depending upon the pathology. So what are the procedures which are available at our disposal? We can do ureteric catheterizations. So the ureters, they could be catheterized, right? So that if patient's condition doesn't allow you any major procedure, then this is the least morbid procedure where we put a cystoscope, we put a ureteric catheter through the ureter, and under image intensifier guidance, we try and get the catheter in between the lumen and the stone. So the catheter can be, you can see here, the catheter is going by the side of the stone up into the kidney. Once this is done, the obstruction is relieved and the urine will start pouring through the lumen of the catheter and some space here. So anuria is relieved. The patient will keep on passing urine. The creatinine will come down. The edema will come down. The electrolytes will get corrected. And then after 72 hours or after 4 or 5 days, we can go back again with a ureteroscope or whatever instrument we have. And then we can remove the stone. You're getting it? So very minimal procedure can be done to safeguard the patient. Go beyond the obstruction and release the obstruction. If it is possible, if the patient's condition permits, then instead of putting a catheter, put a catheter, then go with a scope, see the stone, and you can fragment the stone, clear the stone, and then after clearing the stone, you can put double J stent through the ureters. Or in a scenario like this, situation like this, if there is a stone at the pelviureteric junction, then ureteroscope may be difficult. In those situations, we can directly from outside puncture the kidney, go inside and keep a nephrostomy tube. Don't do anything. So the nephrostomy will drain all the urine, and after 3 or 4 days, when the situation becomes normal, we can replace this with a nephroscope inside, fragment the stone, take out the stone, and the matter is over. Right? So this procedure will be called as, initially it is percutaneous nephrostomy only, PCN. So PCN, and after 3 or 4 days, through the PCN, put a scope and do a percutaneous nephrolithotomy or nephrolithotripsy, fragment the stone. Right? Now, if you don't have any scope at your disposal, you are working in deep periphery. In those situations, we can do open procedure. We can take an open incision and we can directly go and either do a nephrostomy, open nephrostomy, or pylostomy here, or we can open the pelvis and take out the stone, depending upon the patient's condition. If the patient condition allows you, take out the stone. If patient condition is not that good, just go inside, keep a tube in the kidney like this, matter is over. And then again, when the patient's condition improves, you can remove the stone. So renal decompression is the first thing. Same, again, I'm just giving you the same example here. Now there is a stone at the pelviureteric junction on one side, in the middle 1/3 of the ureter on other side. What can we do? We can pass a ureteroscope from below. We can go up to here, and then if we are not able to tackle the stone at this juncture, put a guide wire across the stone into the dilated portion of the pelvic alveolar system, and then put a double J stent. So we can see here the double J stent is put on either side. So what is happening here? The stones are there, no doubt, but the urine, whatever is produced by the kidney, is reaching into the bladder. So the emergency is over. Now keep this till the patient's condition improves. Say after 4 days, 5 days, 1 week, go back, take out the stents. Now you are able to, patient condition will allow you to go up to the stone, fragment the stone on this side, go on this side, fragment the stone. So you are doing a definitive. So this procedure will be called as ureterorhinoscopy. Now the same patient, we are trying to go from below, but sometimes it is not possible to go to the ureters. In those cases, what we have to do? There is obstruction, but the kidneys are dilated. So nephrostomy on either side. So put a percutaneous nephrostomy on either side. When the condition improves, then these stones they are done. So here, what is done? The procedure is done in stages. This will be called a staged procedure. So in stage 1, just bypass the obstruction, and stage 2, take out the obstruction. Why? So this is another example. So here, if it is a ureteric stone, here we can put a flexible ureteroscope or rigid ureteroscope, go up to the stone. When the condition improves and patient allows, we can catch the stone with Dormia basket and take it out, or we can go here and put a laser application and we can fragment the stone. So the stone gets pulverized. So this is called as ureterorhinoscopic removal or fragmentation. If there are stones bilateral, we can do a percutaneous nephrostomy from outside the kidney. A catheter is put into the pelvic alveolar system. We can see here the pigtail catheter, which is draining the urine outside. Let there be block into the ureter. Then through this, when the patient's condition improves, we can put a nephroscope and we can take out the stone. So these are the different procedures which we can do. And then after the procedures are done, we can take the X-rays. So here we can see a X-ray KUV where there are bilateral double J stents. They are put right from the kidney up to the bladder on either side. You can see it on both sides. So in this patient, there were stones at these areas. On both sides, the stones were fragmented in the one sitting. The stones were cleared out and then stents were kept. On the other side, in this patient, if we can see here, there was a stone on middle ureter. So that was fragmented, cleared, and a stent is kept. But on this side, if we can see, there are multiple stones. And one of the stones were blocking here, the kidney. So what was done? That stone was disimpacted. The stone is dislodged outside, inside, and then a stent is kept. So now whatever urine is produced comes down. Once the condition improves, now this patient will require percutaneous nephrolithotomy. Or you can do open removal of the stones. So this is what will be done. So this is done in stage procedure. So here it was one stage procedure, while here it will be two stage procedure. In first stage, stents are kept, kidneys are safeguarded, and in second stage, the stones are cleared. While here, if you can see on both sides of pigtails, we can see they are coming outside the abdominal wall. So this is bilateral PCN, bilateral percutaneous nephrostomies are kept. You can see here a stone. Probably this stone was blocking the pelviuretic junction. So these are kept, say for 1 week or even up to 2 weeks, it can be kept. And when the condition improves, we can dilate these tracts, go inside the kidney with a nephroscope and remove the obstruction. Right? So this is the treatment of post-renal aneurias. So we have to do second stage procedures if required. And then once those procedures are done, now here we have cleared the stone. How long we are going to keep the stents inside? Till the kidneys start normally functioning. How long the kidneys will take? Say roughly 1 to 2 weeks. So these stents, they are kept inside roughly up to 3 weeks. And after 3 weeks, the stents, they are removed. That is called a follow procedure. So you may have to do follow procedure. Once you are done these procedures, you're taken out the patient out of harm's way. The patient is out of danger. The kidneys are settling down. Now we have to advise the patient about how to prevent further episodes. Like he has to take plenty of fluid. All the treatment for renal calculi has to be given to the patient, and the patient should be asked to do repeated investigations. Like every 6 months, he has to undergo ultrasonography just to check whether he is reforming the stones or not. So all the preventive measures the patient need be advised. So this is all about the post-renal anuria. So roughly these are the causes, these are the treatments they are given, and then the preventive measures. So this is how the post-renal anurias, they have to be treated. So what we will remember now? There are 3 types of anurias as far as kidneys are concerned: pre-renal, renal, post-renal. The pre-renal and renal causes of anuria are usually medical reasons. So they don't fall in purview of surgery. While the post-renal anuria is because of obstruction. And the obstruction has to be relieved by some intervention, and that is why this obstructive anuria is tackled by a surgeon or urosurgeon. This we have to remember. So, like in jaundice, there is obstructive jaundice, post-hepatic jaundice. In kidney, the post-renal anuria is obstructive. The commonest cause of post-renal anuria is stones, bilateral stones. Other causes, say for example, if there is a growth instead of a stone, instead of a stone on both sides, if there is a, because uterine body and cervix will be immediately in vicinity, or the rectum in the immediate vicinity. If there is a growth which is infiltrating from outside the ureteric orifice, what treatment we can give is we have to put a guide wire into the ureters, and on that guide wire, a stent has to be kept. The stent is put. So once the stent is there into the ureters, they will refuse for kinking or blockage because of the growth from outside. The urine will keep on draining. So the anuria will be taken care of. And then simultaneously, you have to treat the growth by doing surgery or radiation, whatever you want to do. So the treatment of the cause has to be done simultaneously. So this is all about post-renal anuria. So our usual advice is stay safe, play safe, and be safe. Thank you.